Right, it's 10 o'clock. I think we can go ahead and get things rolling. Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be here this morning. My name is Vicki Williams. I am the Chief Programs and Communications Officer with the USC Institute for Addiction Science. And I will be stepping in for Dr. Adam Leventhal as your moderator for today's webinar, The State of the Science, Social Media, and Addiction. Unfortunately and unexpectedly, Dr. Leventhal couldn't be here with us today, so I'll be moderating in his absence. We are thrilled to have such a wide audience joining us today. We have researchers and educators, and students, industry leaders, practitioners, all coming together to explore the exciting intersections of digital technology and addiction science. This event is co-hosted by IAS, or the Institute for Addiction Science, and the USC Neely Center for Ethical Leadership and Decision Making. For those of you who don't know, just very quickly, IAS is a transdisciplinary academic unit at USC. We're dedicated to advancing addiction science, training the next generation of leaders in addiction science, and partnering with communities to translate science into real world impact. We have over 90 faculty members across 11 different schools and departments. And so we've made many connections with various different centers across USC, and one of which is the Neely Center at the USC Marshall School of Business, whose mission is to equip leaders with tools at the intersection of ethics and technology, guiding responsible decision making in emerging areas of innovation. Today's webinar is designed to highlight cutting edge research, emerging trends, innovative tools that are kind of shaping the future of behavioral health and a digital world. Our goal today is just to spark some conversations, share ideas, and inspire collaboration across these disciplines. We are very fortunate to have with us an incredible panel of experts who bring diverse perspectives and expertise to this topic. In not the order of the agenda, we have Aubrey Amstutz from Responsible AI and Safety Policy and Evaluation Manager at Grid Dynamics. Wave hello, Aubrey. We have Dr. Ian Anderson, a behavioral scientist at Caltech. Hi, Ian. Dr. Ravi Iyer, he's the managing director at the USC Marshall School of Business's Neely Center. We have Dr. Fred Morstatter, research associate professor at USC's Information Sciences Institute. And we have Dr. Luca Luccheri, also research assistant professor at the USC Information Sciences Institute. So we have lots to get through and really great discussion to look forward to. So here's how we're going to move through this session. Each panelist will share their insights, and then we'll kind of move into a moderated discussion, and then finally open the floor to audience questions. So please use the Q&A feature, and we will address as many questions as time allows us. Thank you again for joining us. We can go ahead and get started. I would like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Ravi Iyer. Dr. Iyer is a social psychologist and technologist dedicated to improving technology's impact on society. He currently serves as the research director at the Neely Center and helps lead the Psychology of Technology Institute. Previously, he guided data science and product teams at Facebook to address social media societal impact, and co-founded Ranker.com as its first chief data scientist. His research on human voice, values, societal divisions, and technology design has been widely published, cited over 10,000 times, and featured in outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Wired. So Dr. Iyer will be talking about the unwanted usage platforms, the design patterns that lead to unwanted and regretted usage. So with that, go ahead and take it away, Dr. Iyer.
Great, thank you so much for being here. And I put my slides there, so if you don't mind sharing them, you're welcome to follow along. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So great, it's great to be here. I'm going to talk about the effects of optimizing for usage of online platforms. Businesses are going to do what they're going to do. They're going to try to get you the platforms more. There are various ways of doing it. And some of them have more implications for unwanted usage than others. So, I used to work at Meta, and so there are various ingredients. I used to work on the newsfeed integrity team. So what when you see content on Meta, how do we rank content? How do we decide what to show you and what shows first and what shows last? And there are lots of things you can optimize for, and so you'll often see companies say they try to give users what they want. But we all have two different kinds of wants, right? And so in the academic literature, they're often called revealed preference versus stated preference, what I do versus what I say I want to do. Then it becomes system one versus system two. Um, and on the bottom, I'll show you some of the things that, if you read descriptions of companies, their own algorithms, they include some of these ingredients, things like optimizing for the amount of time that people view a piece of content, what they click on, what they comment on. And these are kind of behaviors. These are things that they do. And then companies can also optimize for things that people say they want, right? They can survey people. So YouTube will often talk about they survey people what they find valuable. They can also have user interfaces that more explicitly indicate things that people want. When they upvote something or they love React something, right? So everything falls along this continuum. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect categorization, but along a continuum of things that are more observed behaviors and expressed aspirations. And in life, we can also see things that we sort of do that you could sort of see online analogs of that maybe we don't necessarily want to do that are contrary to our expressed aspirations. So, for example, in life, you'll often watch me on my phone when I should be playing with my kids. But I don't aspire to do that. It's kind of an unwanted behavior, and instead, I'd rather be playing with my kids. In life, you'll often see me eat unhealthy foods. Like at some level, I want a donut, but I don't want to want donuts, right? My aspiration is to eat healthier food. In life, I might watch some, reality TV. I don't aspire to watch more reality TV. I actually aspire to sort of watch more informative content, right? And you see the same thing happen online where people, aspire, to see healthier content. They aspire to actually spend less time on their phones. But a lot of these algorithms are actually optimized more for their observed behavior, right? They're trying to get them to do something they don't necessarily want to do in the long term. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the effects of that. People regret their time on many online platforms as a result of that optimization. I'm going to see not only do they regret their time, but they also see content they don't want to see. They have contact they don't want to see between others. I'm going to talk about some of the platform designs that lead to these. I'm going to talk about some of the policies that are sort of coming online that address these designs and try to say, we should actually optimize for user agency. And I'll end by talking about how the same pattern occurs, not just for social media, but occurs for other technologies. So here's just a couple stats on like unwanted excessive usage. I often don't use the term addiction because it's, people can debate like what that means, but it's very clear that people are regretting usage of these platforms, right? So a recent Pew poll, 45% of teenagers said that they use social media too much, right? So this is not adults saying to them, you're using social media too much. This is them saying, teenager, I know I'm spending too much time on this product, right? And they'll often talk about how it's difficult to stop. They'll often talk about how it affects their sleep, it affects their productivity. And so, just like if I were to poll this audience, I'm pretty sure most of you would say, like, I have a complex relationship with my phone, and there are times I wish I could spend less time on it. It's a very common feeling, right? And these feelings are not specific, they're not equally distributed across apps. So there are apps that optimize more for your time spent. Apps like Twitter and TikTok and Snapchat. Twitter's actually open source algorithm at source, and you can see that it optimizes for a lot of those behaviors, right? Whereas YouTube talked about how it optimizes more for surveys, and it actually doesn't try to lock you in, right? Like you can go to YouTube, watch a video, not be logged in at all. And so you see different levels of regretted usage on these platforms. And then as a result of this optimizing for usage, you get to oftentimes unwanted contact and unwanted content. And, because a platform will often, one way it gets you on is it gets you talking to more and more people. It's not enough for you to be talking to the 15 people you came there to talk to. Let's try and have you make friends with, 50 other people who maybe you have loose connections with, or maybe some strangers somewhere else who you may share an interest with. And so that way you have more stuff you can do on that platform. But that leads to risks, right? That leads to unwanted sexual advances. And so in one study at Meta, 13% of 13 to 15-year-olds reported receiving an unwanted sexual advance in a 7-day period. And then in a study that Snap did across platforms, 35% of users in a 3-month period of young users reported unwanted contact from others. unwanted content. So similar study, Meta again a couple of years ago, 19.2% of youth, 13 to 15 years old, reported seeing unwanted sexual content, right? One way that you can get you to use this platform more is you can show a lot of like people doing, attention-getting activities, right? They can be being more revealing, more sexual, they can be more violent, they can be more graphic. And a lot of these things are not things that people actually want to see, right? So um, this is not users reporting seeing sexual content. This is users reporting unwanted sexual content, right? 12.8% of 13 to 15-year-olds in a 7-day period reported seeing violence. Australia's e-safety organization has done similar kinds of studies. In a 12-month period, for example, 34% of teens reported seeing bite videos. So a lot of people are seeing this unwanted, harmful content. They're having contact with people they don't want as a result of this optimization for using these platforms more. And there are a lot of reasons why these platforms are designed this way. I mentioned the algorithms. They're optimized for what we pay attention to, not what users are explicitly requesting, right? And so just, having those algorithms, changing the optimization function of those algorithms is one thing we can address, really optimizing for explicit preference. There's ephemeral content, right? This idea that this content's going to disappear in 24 hours. So even if you don't want to get on that platform, you might feel like you have to get on that platform or else you're going to miss out on some piece of content. So that fear of missing out is a common complaint of users as a result of some of these design patterns. Notifications. So like oftentimes users will complain about excessive notifications. So even if you're not trying to use the platform more, you're not using it, and then you get a notification that like, oh, one of your friends said something, or someone commented on your post, and like, okay, I got to see what that thing is, because I have some kind of social pressure to do that. Gamification of engagement, things like Snapchat streaks, right? Like, so I'm not just gonna talk to my friends, but I'm going to keep track of who I'm talking to and how long and how many days in a row I've talked to. So, and you'll see youth, when they go on vacation, they actually, will give their phone to their friend because they don't want to lose their streak, right? They're no longer using it because they want to. They're using it because they're trying to keep that streak up, that gamification. And then even just simple things like requiring accounts to view content, right? Like, you could be, if I want to see what Taylor Swift said on Instagram, I don't necessarily need an account to do that, right? On YouTube, I could do that with no problem. But on Instagram, they're going to keep making me, give me a bunch of pop-ups until I eventually relent and sign up for an account. And then they'll send me a bunch of notifications. So there are all these ways they tempt you to use these platforms more. And then there are all these ways they reduce your willpower to use them less, right? So they remove all the friction. They have things like infinite scroll and autoplay. So I don't have like a second to think like, do I want to use this platform more? Do I want to play that video? It just plays automatically. On the hopeful side, there are now policies that try to address these things. Right? So now we have addictive feed laws in California and New York that say that platforms can no longer personalize, these algorithms to increase usage of those platforms, right? So that's at least for kids, right? You could argue that for adults, it's up to me to exercise my willpower, but I think we all agree that kids have reduced willpower, and maybe you're not, maybe we need to give them a little bit more protection. We also have design code laws recently passed in Nebraska and Vermont that sort of increase the amount of friction to ensure intentional usage, right? Removing things like infinite scroll and autoplay, or like increased privacy. So you don't have like, you're limited to the set of friends you have, or you're more likely to be limited to the set of friends you have versus this increasing set of friends that platforms want to introduce you to increase your time on the platform. And then you have like laws like Mississippi's law that say youth can't create accounts on these platforms. And in an ideal world, I think a lot of these laws would still let you see content on these platforms, but maybe you don't have to create an account, right? So maybe you can use it more like YouTube, where you search for a thing, you watch it, and then you move on, as opposed to something like Instagram, where you're constantly scrolling, and so you still have access to content, but you're not sort of locked into a business relationship with these platforms. Another policy that has been there's been a lot of positive feedback of these, and these are early days still, and you see some of the positive feedback on the right, are distraction-free school laws, right? So like, just, if you're in school, a lot of kids were, in one study, kids were reporting, 90 minutes, 2 hours on average of use of social media at school, right? During a 6.5-hour period, right? So a fairly large amount of time. And that's average. There are some kids who are using a lot, and there's some kids who are using it not at all. And really just, and a lot of kids were like, even if they're not using it, they're thinking of that, right? They're not getting a break. They're wondering what is being said online, and what am I missing out on during class? And it distracts them. And teachers, were complaining about this, like trying to figure out how to get students off of their phones. 90% of teachers support these phone-free school laws. not because they think grades will improve or mental health will improve, but they're just tired of fighting these students, right? It's just a distraction to their learning environment. So light green here, these are states that have passed bell-to-bell phone-free school laws. Dark green are states that passed something less than that. Almost every state has considered, passed, or has passed an ideal law. And again, the early returns are really good for these phone-free school laws. Teachers will report like being in tears, just seeing like the chatter. The lunchroom is just a very different place where people are talking to each other as opposed to everyone's on their phones. So those are some of the ways that we're sort of making progress against systems that are designed to sustain our attention. But as we move into a world of increasing I just wanted to bring up this quote. This is an old quote from an early Facebook engineer, just observing that the best minds of his generation were thinking about how to get people to click ads and how that kind of sucks, right? And that's not necessarily the innovation that people who are creating AI technologies promised us, right? Like, OpenAI, talks a lot about solving, medical problems with AI, and now they have a system that's designed to like get you to watch AI generated videos as much as, as uh, maybe useful for their business. And so that, I just think we should question when companies talk about innovation, and that's not just, generative AI. That's like, also companion chatbots that maybe use intimacy to sustain your attention. That may be video games that no longer about, I pay $40 to use a game, and I can use as much as I want, but they have this incentive to get you to use it longer because now the business model is like buying more stuff within the game, right? So the longer you use it, the more likely you are to buy more stuff in the game. Or even like online gambling platforms that use AI to figure out like the right bet to offer you at the right time to get you to do it more, right? All of these things are things that are trying to get us to do things more than we want to do. And so I just question whether we think of those things as innovation, and question whether we're creating some of the same externalities that we see for social media across all of these new products. So with that, I look forward to the conversation later, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iyer. So next we have Aubrey Amstutz. She has over a decade of experience working at the intersection of technology and language. She began working at an in-person tech support desk while studying literature and French at the College of Creative Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Aubrey holds a master's degree in linguistics and cognitive studies from the University of Siena in Italy, where she also studied Italian and worked for an Estonian language learning tech startup. She has continued to work in diverse applied linguistics settings in industry, including on text features, product policies on the US trust and safety team for TikTok, and currently managing a team of researchers and engineers creating responsible AI product policy and evaluation. Aubrey's very passionate about the interdisciplinary industry academia partnership, and she'll be sharing some of her current and past experience working in the industry and provide her perspectives on this topic. Aubrey?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so as we just heard, thank you for that intro. I've worked at kind of a variety of companies over the years, including Apple, Microsoft, Duolingo, Scale AI, and TikTok. And so I've seen a variety of different products and features, and I think um, the the goal of the feature and whether or not that sort of goal aligns with the user's goal is really important here to consider, like Ravi was just talking about. When you're thinking about something like language learning, the goal is for you to want to come back. And so you do want it to be gamified because you're wanting that aspiration is to be coming back and actually practicing that language. Where with something like social media, maybe your aspiration is not to spend as much time on it. But thinking about the kind of the topic today of thinking about addiction, and maybe addiction is a very loaded word, so I really love that unwanted usage terminology. I think that it's not such a surprise that in a society that is increasingly um, where we feel increasingly isolated or lonely, like there's this sort of loneliness epidemic that people talk about, that these uh, areas, these maybe like loci or vehicles for social connection, things like alcohol at a bar maybe could be seen as like a precursor to a social media algorithm that is, or a social media experience where you're looking for that connection, and if you are not participating in that, you will be missing out on something culturally relevant with your peers. And that then sort of reinforces that isolation and feelings of loneliness because you feel out of the loop. You don't feel like you belong in that group. And so I don't think it's necessarily surprising or coincidental that these are places where when people feel that they aren't getting that connection, they don't have a community, they're going for trying to increase that social connection, that feeling of social connection, and then that can lead to unwanted usage and sort of overindulgence, we could say. So I think it's really interesting, and I'm really glad that we have this group coming together to talk about this today. Um, as far as like some of the sort of UX design or the different choices that companies can make, I definitely agree with everything that Ravi was just talking about as far as the um, importance of the design choices that the team makes when it comes to allowing users to have that sort of informed consent about what they're doing, the risks of the product that they're using, and giving them the agency to control their experience with it. So you can think of some examples like I know TikTok has a feature that gives you a pop-up that reminds you, hey, you've been on for a while, maybe it's time for a break. I think OpenAI just released something like that, which is really interesting as well, saying, hey, you've been chatting for a while. And I think if you think about something like going back to what I was saying earlier about the product really uh, being the metrics that you need to think about for engagement being really different for the different products, we can look at. You can think of something like OpenAI, like their ChatGPT. If you think that it is for finding out information quickly and being able to go on with your day, if we think of it akin to like a Google search or something like that, then really it should be minimized time, minimized usage, right? And I think that's kind of what they are saying in some of their, marketing materials is we want you to come and feel satisfied that you got the answer you needed and then go on with your day, not sitting here and talking all day. There's different, obviously, use cases. ChatGPT is meant to be this kind of everything assistant thing. So there's obviously like the more, social, if it's marketed as like a friend, that's a different situation. But you can think about how those small choices, like the pop-up reminder, hey, are you really, meaning to still be here, can affect usage. But it really, like Ravi is saying, it really is putting a lot of onus on the user to be really responsible. And I think that is really difficult. And I think there needs to be education. And I'm a fan of these, like these attempts at policy, at least these attempts at governance, coming from, the different states and things like that, because I don't think that tech companies can be in this current state fully responsible for this and expect and that we can expect for users to be able to make these healthy choices just with the tools that tech companies are providing. I think we need also education coming from academia with especially for younger people using technology to so that they can understand what those risks are. um, and yeah, another feature that I've seen recently, is Facebook has like a just your friends feed, which I think is really funny because that's kind of like classic Facebook, what Facebook was. So you can switch between the feed of just, all of the stuff that your algorithm has sort of the lint that it's sort of picked up, and then just what your friends are posting, which is really what people were there for in the beginning. I think that's kind of interesting that it's come full circle in a way. Um, Instagram also released a feature that allows you to reset your reset your algorithm completely. And so if you feel like, and this was, I think there was a term coming out of research, like coming out of academia, something like algorithmic anxiety, where people were feeling like they kind of didn't know how to stop where their algorithm was headed. It was kind of spiraling in a direction they weren't um, desiring, and they wanted it to reflect their desires and maybe their aspirations a little bit more than it was. And so this allows people to just start fresh. Whether or not people are taking advantage of that, I don't know. I think that's a really big, especially because I remember on TikTok, people were very sort of proud of the algorithm that they felt they had curated for themselves and how well it knew them. And so starting over is a really big step and really difficult to probably make that call. But I think when people do take advantage of that and reset their filters, um, they probably find it less engaging, which maybe helps if they are trying to cut down on usage. Yeah, so I think that, like I said, the information that we're getting from all of the researchers that are on this panel is so crucial to be shared with end users in an accessible format so that they can have, yeah, just all of the information in their kind of toolkit, as well as the support of UX design from companies that allows them to have more agency in the way that they interact with these different products. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aubrey. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions for you in the discussion. All right, next up, allow me to introduce Dr. Wait, where are we? Sorry. Dr. Ian Morstatter. Is that where I am? No, sorry. Ian Anderson. I was like, that didn't sound right. Dr. Anderson is an American researcher and artist born in Ann Arbor, Michigan. His current research interests include how psychological and interpersonal processes are influenced by media use and human-computer interaction. His research work examines habits and automatic processes, online posting and scrolling behavior, hate speech and extremism, conspiracies and rumor, well-being, identity and stereotypes, and social media influence. His methodological approaches involve experimental and quasi-experimental designs, randomized controlled trials, and computational natural language processing, qualitative methods, linear models, multi-level models, and choice models. He currently holds a BA in economics and political science from Swarthmore College and a master's in management focused on marketing and consumer psychology from NCID, as well as a master's and PhD in social psychology from the University of Southern California. Dr. Morstatter will be Anderson, sorry. Take it away.
Thanks. Everyone can see my screen, correct? Great. So thanks for the introduction, Victoria. And so yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about unpacking the way we use the term digital media addiction. Actually, the title of the seminar basically like triggered my bat signal related to this topic. So I'll be soapboxing a little bit about this. And yeah, so I want to present to you guys sort of an integrated model of digital media habits and addiction, which I think talks about the way that I understand digital media use, and I think could be helpful also for people who use digital media and generally people in the audience. So without further ado, so when I got the invite to this panel, I was actually a little bit surprised, especially given that the Addiction Science Institute was involved. So I want to say first that I come in peace and that this is actually a clickbait headline. I did write this article that says digital media addiction is a myth. What you have is a bad habit and it's fixable. But if I could rephrase it, I would, I promise. Actually, the Washington Post editors chose this and I had no involvement in it. So yeah, again, I come in peace to all the addiction scholars in the audience. So this would be the rewrite that I would suggest. Digital addiction is relatively rare, and what you have is likely a bad habit, and that is fixable. So that's probably my actual perspective, which is related to social media habits. And I'll explain a little bit about what those are in a minute. So despite the fact that the term digital addiction and addiction is really, really frequently used, related to when people talk about, oh, I'm so addicted to TikTok, I'm so addicted to Instagram. Clinical addiction to social media apps is actually very rare, according to the scientific research. And presently, the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Manual for Disorders and stuff that's used by clinicians, does not recognize social media addiction as a disorder. Even addiction researchers who are involved in this field are quite critical of the way that addiction is being currently applied to digital and social media use. And there's a whole debate, basically, like in order to explain um, social media addiction, they had to create a separate category of addictions. And this was also used to explain like internet addiction and things like that, because digital media is not a substance. It doesn't act in the same way as like alcohol or cigarettes do. People often use this metaphor, but I actually find that metaphor quite frustrating because there's a lot of things about it that are very different in the way that it operates. And I think it actually undermines people's ability to understand and better control their use, which I've done some research on. So I know you guys are already probably aware of this, but I actually went in and looked at how many articles that talk about social media addiction versus social media habit are out there. And over the past few years, like the addiction framework and the narrative related to social media is absolutely dominating. Like it's like 10 times the amount of articles. And on the right here, you have a graph of the social media engagement with those articles. And basically, there's almost no time in which the term habit is even close to the usage of the term addiction in terms of the articles that and the engagement traction that you're getting. So the addiction field is currently winning the existential battle that I'm involved in as a habit researcher. Um, and clearly my op-ed did not have the impact that I was hoping, right? So uh, actually, this is a little bit of a problem. And I'm going to start here where I surveyed a bunch of Instagram users, and I also did this with TikTok, but we basically find that way more people perceive themselves to be addicted to social media apps than are actually at risk for addiction to those apps. So, in a nationally representative sample of Instagram users, only like 2% of users were actually at risk for clinical addiction to the app versus almost 20%, 18.2% of these users, if you ask them, they would agree that they are at least somewhat addicted to Instagram, right? So there's a big like overperception bubble, and it's probably being driven by this media narrative and this colloquial usage of the term addiction when you kind of probe it. So we actually also found some other negative consequences of this usage of this term. And we know already that heavy digital media use isn't always necessarily an addiction. So we also probably always shouldn't be talking about it like that. So some of the basic risks that have been documented by scientists, one is like basically pathologizing everyday technology use and like causing people to be like, oh, all of my technology use behavior is bad or addictive. There's actually a risk of biasing scientific research itself and the conclusions that we draw from it. For example, there's a study that basically showed if you put an addiction survey measure before well-being survey measures, you get negative effects for well-being. But if you reverse those two survey measures, you won't get the same effects. You'll get like more neutral effects on well-being. So basically, providing people with that addiction framework in advance can actually impact their responses to survey measures about how social media is affecting their well-being. And I actually experimentally induced greater perceived addiction among a bunch of daily users. And we found that that was enough to reduce their feelings of control over their social media use. So basically, it undermined their perceived ability to control their use, the amount that they blame themselves of their own for their own use of the app for overuse of the app. So like that unwanted use that Robbie was talking about, they start to blame themselves for that rather than locating that with like the design of the app, which is actually responsible for that overuse. And finally, I think there's also risks of like techno panic narratives, which is basically like kind of moral panic about technology beginning to dominate the discussion about how to change or regulate social media. So again, as I said before, I come in peace with an alternative proposal to constantly talking about addiction, where basically this is kind of how the science views it, I would say. And I think this is something that needs to be better communicated to the public. And addiction is an important concept. I don't want to say that it doesn't exist, right? People could potentially be addicted to social media apps, but that's something that needs to be, done by a clinician, and it should be reserved for people who like actually end up at or beyond the clinical addiction threshold, right? So, but before that point on the left here, people are probably have a weak or a strong habit to use social media apps, and hopefully you'd have people on the left here with like using apps in a mindful and consciously controlled and goal-directed way. But the design of the apps presently actually encourages habitual and potentially addictive use, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit in a second. So I think it's helpful to have a basic definition of habits as well, so that you guys understand what I'm talking about when I say weak to strong habits. And these are rewarded behaviors. So like posting on a platform that are repeated in a stable context. Those contexts can be basically like a tech interface. And these, as they're rewarded over time, they can become triggered mindlessly in response to that context. And basically, you can end up like scrolling TikTok without even intending to, right? So you open your phone, and because you open your phone so often and see that icon and it's visible to you, that becomes the cue for the scrolling behavior. And these behaviors, these habitual behaviors, especially when they become really strong and they're in the presence of these constantly present cues like the smartphone, they are very easy for people to conflate with addiction because strong habits are really hard to control, and they also create gaps between people's intentions and their behaviors. So because most heavy use is probably habitual, and we know it's habitual rather than addictive, if you have a bad digital media habit, habit science can actually help with that. So there are different solutions kind of proposed by an addiction framework and a habit framework, right? So if you're truly addicted, like you might need rehabilitation, you might need to ban yourself from using the app. Digital detoxes might be something that would work for you. But if you have a habit, actually, some of these solutions won't work because as soon as you get back into the presence of those cues that trigger your habits, like those habits will come back pretty quickly. So habit-based solutions that you can use right now, in absence of the apps themselves, basically redesigning things so that behavior is less habitual and more mindful, right? And I think Aubrey gave some good examples of things that they are doing, but there's also a lot of things that they're not doing that they could do. So one is to focus on very specific behaviors that are tied to very specific cues, right? So is it seeing the app icon that is triggering a scrolling habit? Is it seeing notifications that is triggering like a posting habit? Are you habitually like resharing Instagram stories, right? And what is triggering that? And the best thing you can do is remove the cues to those things. So, resetting your algorithm, deleting the app, and then forcing yourself to reinstall it like every time you want to use it. These kind of things that add friction are things that you can do on your own, right? And also, you can try to, when you do try to add that friction, you should also incentivize alternative behaviors, right? So basically, try to build better habits related to other things, or things that you would prefer to be doing that can like supplant the bad habit. So that's a tactic that also works. So I'll talk a little bit about other things that we can do right now. I think we need to, like, as scientists, like push back against some of the moral panic about digital technology and fixate on the real problems with it that are well documented. I think like the perverse incentives that we know make platforms worse, a lot of them Ravi outlined, focus on the problems where the evidence is really clear, like misinformation, hate speech, unwanted sexual content with children, these kind of things. I think we need to push for evidence-based regulation and action that addresses specific problems in the design of the platforms, and also support apps that are doing things better. There are apps that are doing things at least a bit better than some of the major ones, and I think that we should probably support those with our consumer choice. And finally, also push for better access for independent scientists to platform data, also for safety standards for the industry, because digital tech, I think, has basically proven itself unwilling to regulate itself and unwilling to fix these problems on its own. So I think basically one of the things that we need to push for in the long term is like good regulation, smart regulation, research-based regulation of big tech, because we need to shift the business model incentives. Right now, they're completely over-indexing on those, and there are very few pro-social incentives involved in the way people are designing these platforms. And I think through smart regulation, you can also like set up standards for, transparency, better competition among the apps, safety, and help basically, generate a better future state where we have like more pro-social incentives, like basically counterweighting the business model stuff. And so I guess the final proposal for you all is that we change the name of the webinar to the Digital Media Habits and Addiction webinar, just to yeah, conclude. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Very interesting perspectives. All right, next up, we have Dr. Fred Morstatter, who is a research assistant professor of computer science at the USC, at USC, and a research team lead at USC's Information Sciences Institute, or ISI. His work focuses on social network analysis, misinformation detection, cultural modeling, machine learning, and fairness in AI systems. He's recently published on detecting polarization and cyberbullying in online environments. He's the principal investigator of the ISI's effort on the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA's Habitus program, and has served as key personnel on the IARPA's programs. Dr. Morstatter holds a PhD in computer science from Arizona State University, and he'll be talking about digital phenotyping, social media, and tools for understanding ADHD and addiction.
All right, thanks, Victoria, and thanks everybody for being here. So I'm talking about digital phenotyping, social media, new tools for understanding ADHD and addiction. So there are a lot of studies out there that say that ADHD symptoms in adolescents are linked to frequent digital media use. So the more you use Instagram, TikTok, things like this, the more the symptoms of ADHD show themselves, right? And just one study here is linked on the right. The problem is that a lot of the existing research uses really superficial methods, or measures, I should say, to get at that. So they look at things like, total screen time, screen brightness, things like this. And it's really not deep enough to get into what the content is, what it is about the content that's actually exacerbating these symptoms. And a lot of the new media platforms, things like YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, they have really unique features that could increase ADHD risk. My colleagues on this call have been talking about them today, things like streaks, like counts, things like this. And we need a deeper understanding in order to know which of those features are actually triggering some of these symptoms. So what we want to do is we want to isolate specific media characteristics that contribute to attention dysregulation. And also, we want to see how those things affect other addictions too, like how tobacco companies are advertising nicotine products to kids, things like this. And our hypothesis is that AI-powered tools can enable large-scale, precise content analysis that really helps us understand what about these platforms is actually driving addiction. So this is the broad approach we put together. So the idea here is that by working with IAS, we can actually get human subjects, participants, to come in and take surveys about how their ADHD symptoms are doing, what their screen time has been. We can also even have them play with their phones when they're in the lab setting and see what they're looking at on TikTok and what they're looking at on Instagram. And then we can take those videos and we can actually identify features, or measures, I should say, that are associated with addiction, and see which ones are more causal, see which ones are more prevalent among the folks who actually have those ADHD symptoms. And we can do this with measurements of videos, but also measurements of apps. So an example of a measurement of app was, I believe it was Aubrey who was talking about digital gambling, right? And they have all these bells and whistles to get you to increase your bet, or do a parlay, things like this. And that's a feature of an app that's not necessarily in a video, but can increase your likelihood to continue interacting with that particular app. So one dimension that we're particularly interested in here is brain rot. And this is just one dimension, right? There are many things that we're looking at here. But brain rot is particularly interesting because it's sort of this new phenomenon that really brings you in and doesn't let you go away. And there are some initial studies that kind of show that this is really bad for people who have ADHD symptoms. So brain rot videos tend to be shorter. They're 5 to 30 seconds. They have a lot of rapid edits and jump cuts. So they'll have a ton of different scene changes. They have all types of different media in them. So they have music, they have voice, they have emojis and text on screen. They have very high motion intensity. So unfortunately, this thing here on the right is just a picture. But if you were to actually watch the video, it's like basically this video of this guy jumping over those different cubes, and you just like kind of feel yourself getting pulled in and like hypnotized by it. Sometimes they have shocking explicit content, and they never have any pauses for reflection or processing. And like I said, there's some studies that say that these are really, really bad for people with ADHD. It trains your brain for those quick attention shifts. It promotes impatience and reward seeking, and it reduces those opportunities for sustained focus and executive control and reflection. So in that screen I showed you 2 slides ago, these are some of the features that we're currently pulling out of the videos. So we have things like temporal dynamics, things like the video duration, how many cuts are there in the video, how long are those cuts, how complex is the audio? Is there music? Is there speech? Are they together? Do we have simultaneous audio streams? How much motion is in the video, right? Like how many motion vectors are in the frame? What's the per pixel motion intensity? We're trying to find multimedia overload, so basically combining a lot of these different features together to see if they fluctuate at the same time. Identifying explicit content, and we're also looking at persuasive messaging, and that's going to be particularly interesting in what I'll show you on the next slide. So persuasive messaging can be things like emotionally persuasive, calls to action, things like this. This has a lot of potential for different groups. So for families and youth, we could actually potentially get to like better advice, not just like, hey, reduce your screen time. It can be like, hey, avoid videos that actually look like this. By giving them guidance about what videos pose higher risk. We could also give an app or a dashboard that gives personalized feedback on viewing habits. It'll enable clinicians to give better recommendations to patients who are struggling with media overuse. And it can also inform treatment planning, alongside the existing suite of tools that are available for ADHD. For public policy and health, it can help inform social media literacy campaigns to help them identify safer content. And it could also inform some industry regulation, like designing nudges or limits on ultra stimulating content. So everything I've talked about today has been focused on really ADHD. But before I turn it over to Luca, who's going to really take it home with the system that we've built, I guess 2 future directions. So the first is digital gambling. I touched on that a little bit today. There are all of these bells and whistles in these digital gambling apps to keep you there, to get you to increase your bet and get you to lose a ton of money. And also they have now in prediction markets questions that like might appeal to younger people to kind of like get them to come over. And the real focus of our tool so far has been on nicotine products. So tobacco products, specifically Zyn or snooze pouches, are subtly advertised heavily on social media, specifically TikTok. There are abundant TikTok videos where people are using Zyns, things like this. And our goal is to be able to identify them and better understand how the effect that they're having on children. So thank you very much, and Luca.
Thanks so much, Dr. Morstetter. All right. Last but definitely not least, we have Dr. Luca Luccheri, a research assistant professor in the USC Thomas Lord Department of Computer Science and a lead scientist at the USC Information Sciences Institute, ISI. His research lies at the intersection of AI, computational social science, and human-machine interaction, with a focus on understanding and mitigating online harms in socio-technical systems. Motivated by the societal risks posed by digital platforms and generative AI, Dr. Luccheri's long-term goal is to foster a more resilient and trustworthy information ecosystem. His work has received international recognition, including media coverage from Time and the Financial Times, as well as several awards, such as the 2024 Young Investigator Award in Artificial Intelligence from the Embassy of Italy. Dr. Luceri will walk us through how influence dynamics and digital media shape behaviors, how they intersect with addiction and harmful health narratives, and how new AI and computational tools can help us understand and reduce these risks.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction, Victoria. It's a pleasure to be here today. As you have just heard, my research and this talk in particular sits at the intersection of social influence, public health, and digital platforms. Probably addiction is not the right term in the title, apologize. And I learned from Ian today that probably should not be used in some context. So apologize, Ian, if I'm misusing this. As we know, social media platforms have become primary source for youth and adults to consume information and build relationship. These environments, unfortunately, are also vector fields for risks, algorithm amplification, manipulative narratives, group polarization, and addictive behaviors. Previous speakers have gone through most of these problems. The main idea here is to understand why are these digital platforms so powerful in shaping behavior? Well, as we already discussed, they're built on reinforcement loops. Every like, every notification we received, every content recommendation is a small yet unpredictable reward, which makes these systems very addictive. Also, additionally, algorithms tend to amplify the most engaging content, pushing content that triggers emotions, reactions, and finally, social influence also amplifies these. When our peers endorse or normalize a behavior, it quickly feels acceptable and even desirable. So when these dynamics are applied to health-related content, the stakes are much higher. And these mechanisms don't just drive screen time, they expose people to harmful narratives that can also distort health choices. And misinformation and manipulative campaigns exploit these very same mechanisms. And online misinformation around health spreads rapidly through artificial amplification. What does this mean? Well, during COVID-19, for example, just a handful of sources were responsible for a huge volume of disinformation on Twitter. And their reach was amplified by coordinated networks of inauthentic accounts. In this figure, the yellow nodes represent these producers of misinformation, while the red nodes show cluster of inauthentic accounts that systematically amplified the narratives generated by these misinformation producers and promoted their websites. And my research demonstrated that this coordinated activity, these coordinated actors, don't just reshare content randomly, but they deliberately and repeatedly push the same messages from these misinformation producers, trying to create an illusion of public consensus around certain viewpoints, and also trying to manipulate platform feed algorithms to give these narratives greater visibility that they would normally achieve organically. Now, the problem, and unfortunately, these campaigns don't stay online. They spill over into offline behaviors, ranging from vaccine refusal to distrust in public health institutions. And research has shown a direct link between exposure to online misinformation and real-world health decisions. What's particularly concerning is how novel campaigns are tailored to specific demographics. This risk is even magnified by the rise of generative AI, which can create credible content and targeted content that may resonate with particular audiences. And these campaigns use music, influencers, and humor to normalize behaviors, harmful behaviors within peer communities. And this, in turn, creates dangerous feedback loop where online narratives reinforce offline vulnerabilities and vice versa. A clear example comes from the promotion of new tobacco and nicotine products. As Fred mentioned before, platforms like TikTok enable viral trends, influencer endorsements, and glamorize tobacco use, to glamorize and to normalize to tobacco use. Adolescents in particular are especially vulnerable to these tactics because they of the usual of aesthetics and peer-like promotion. And because of these new strategies, we urgently need new technological approaches to study and counter these new campaigns. So let me give you a concrete example of what we can do. My collaborators from the Institute for Addiction Science and ISI, including Fred and myself, are building an AI-ready repository to analyze persuasive messaging related to oral nicotine pouches on TikTok. The main idea here is to systematically study what kinds of content drive engagement and how they shape behaviors. And to do so, we created a computational framework that collects video from TikTok and automatically extract a range of characteristics of these videos, such as temporal and audio-based features like the one Fred mentioned before, the presence of music, speech, or sound effects. And we also leverage motion analysis techniques to extract features like number of cuts and frame duration. And our preliminary analysis shows that some of these features correlate with engagement metrics, such as likes, repost, comments, and views. For instance, fast editing strongly boosts engagement metrics. Negative videos tend to draw more reaction and attention as long as moving on screen text, so text that moves within this video. This is particularly effective at capturing attention. And we also leveraged open source large language models to create an automated video annotation system that aims to replicate human coders annotation across key dimensions, such as the type of product that is sponsored or promoted in the video, substance use behavior, and promotional cues. The key idea here is to enable scalability. So instead of relying only on time-intensive manual coding, these systems allows us to replicate and potentially scale up human annotation across thousands or millions of videos. And this works particularly well. Our AI system can accurately identify specific products, detect the use of oral nicotine pouches in the videos, recognize different flavors, and capture video characteristics with a high degree of precision. And finally, we developed an interactive dashboard that allows direct exploration of our annotated pipelines and videos. And here it's a demo of this dashboard called Vista, where videos can be played and also our annotation can be inspected. Here is an example. On the right side, you can see different annotation tags that include the ground truth annotation and the annotation from LLM, such as the presence of packages and pouch in the video, the use of oral nicotine pouches. If brands are mentioned, we can detect that, the flavors, we can uncover the different themes within the video. If other substances are present in the video, if false or misleading claims are made. And then we extract some demographics from the video itself, if human subjects are present. And we can extract also audio features like volume range, speech, and the presence of multimodal characteristics such as animated text, emoji, and music. We can extract temporal dynamics, as I said before, and described in details, and motion analysis features. We can also look for some specific keywords present in our videos, like here's an example with Snus, which is a product commonly used in Sweden. We can automatically get transcript from this video. We can get translation of these videos automatically. So for instance, this video is in French and we can read what is said in this video. We can also extract sentiment and emotional balance and get a summary of the video so that we don't need to look at entirely the video or read the whole transcript. So I want to leave you with a forward-looking perspective, as addiction risks aren't limited to social media and physical substance. They also emerge in our interactions with AI systems themselves. A striking example is the rapid use and rapid rise of AI companions, which is the focus of our current research. We know that millions of people are spending hours each day with conversational agents like Replica or Character AI. And while these systems are marketed as supportive of or entertaining, their design can foster emotional dependency and even addictive patterns of use, as some of the speakers already highlighted. And we are already seeing dire consequences already emerging before we even developed safety frameworks. So cases like teen suicides linked to intensive AI companion use, or cases of AI encouraging self-harm. So wrapping up, the ultimate goal of this research is not just academic insight, it's to give public health practitioners, professionals, and policymakers the tools they need to anticipate risk, reduce and mitigate harms, and protect the most vulnerable communities in this increasingly AI-mediated ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Luccheri. All right. Well, thank you to all of our panelists today for your amazing and wonderful insights. I'm looking forward to this next section of our webinar where we can get some questions answered. And there's a bunch on the Q&A as well as some that were submitted before this webinar from our audience members. I think we can probably jump to the ones that are live now and address some of the questions for the people in the room. So the first one, Dr. Iyer, regarding federal and state policies, what about enforceability? Beyond the theory of possible enforcement, are there real world cases of enforcement?
So unfortunately, there aren't as many as I would like, in part because a lot of these are subject to constitutional challenges. And I think laws are evolving to be better at those challenges. So, really being distinct, that we're not talking about the content that is going through these systems, that we're talking about the design of these systems and the usage of these systems. Now, that is a relatively recent development. And so earlier laws, I think, were more successfully challenged. Later laws are less successfully challenged. The addictive feeds law I mentioned in California, for example, was just recently upheld, holding that there is a difference between, trying to say a specific thing and just trying to get somebody to use a platform more, and you can disentangle that. So there isn't as much as I would like. There are some though. Phone-free school laws is one that's an example that has qualitatively changed the experience of many schools around the country with overwhelmingly positive results. And so I'd say that's the biggest actual success story. There's a recent DSA enforcement that said that, for example, if you change your settings so you don't want to have an algorithm that is set for optimized for usage, they have to keep you there. They can't nudge you back to the setting that you didn't want in the first place. So, and it's on the margins. It's not gonna change things because most people don't change their settings in the first place. But we're seeing increasingly a drumbeat. And what I often like to say is I compare it to cars. We had cars mass produced in the 1900s. We didn't get seatbelts in the 60s. It was a process. Ralph Nader had to do a bunch of stuff to get seatbelts in cars and with airbags. Social media's been around 20 years ish, or 15, 20 years. We it's a process, right? So we're seeing that process play out. It's not happening overnight, but it is happening.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists would like to add anything to that? All right. Let's see. We have several questions for Dr. Anderson. First one is, you noted that social media is not a substance and thus its maladaptive use, example, constant use to the point it negatively impacts one's life, does not exactly fit the requirement for an addiction disorder. However, you also mentioned that some individuals are at risk for being clinically addicted to social media apps. Thus, is a new term in order rather than simply calling it an addiction?
Yeah, so I think the addiction research themselves, addiction researchers have kind of already answered this question, and I think, hopefully my presentation of it was clear enough to say that the idea of behavioral addictions basically is what people would call non-substance addictions. including digital and social media use. So that term kind of already exists, I would say. And I think that term works, but at least in the cases where people can be shown to be clinically addictive, but the criteria for that, I think, are presently debated within the addiction literature, right? Because like for example, like when I was categorizing people as clinically addicted in my research, we used the Bergen scale, which measures like on a number of different dimensions, like whether people are experiencing withdrawal symptoms, how often they're thinking about using a particular social media app, what are the negative life impacts of these kind of things. So there's like 6 different criteria within that scale. And there's some research basically showing maybe, some of these things don't apply because these were derived from substance addictions, right? So like even if you are like having trouble controlling your social media use, is that a sign of addiction, or is that like a sign you have a really strong habit that you're having trouble with? If you're like thinking about it a lot, like so there's like a number of like basically like there's a number of debates going on within the addiction literature about that. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that there is like some remaining debate about how to precisely define when someone is addicted to a social media app, but the term that is presently used is behavioral addictions. Yeah.
Thank you. A question for Aubrey, or anybody on the panelists, but I'll direct it at Aubrey. What role do you think tech companies should play in mitigating addictive design features in digital platforms?
Yeah, should is difficult, right? So this is definitely going to be my opinion. Um, so yeah, I think tech companies like definitely have a responsibility to, like I said, try to provide as much like opportunities for informed consent as they can, about how and transparency about how their technology is designed. I think, uh, like I was saying before, that the kind of metrics that designers or product managers are optimizing for is very dependent on, the goals and the values of that product. So if the goal is, you know, to gather user data to be able to share it with advertisers, then, those product managers are going to be incentivized to design features that encourage sharing, you know, sharing that information in whatever way, whether it's like, clicking through, yes, I'm going to allow, this information to be used for generative AI training, whatever it is. Like there's so many different potential goals that product managers may be incentivized to pursue. And so I think uh, whatever I think, like I said, just being able to communicate that with the audiences, with our users, is like really important. And in this sort of landscape of increasingly AI usage and increasingly these sort of black box algorithms and these unexplainable products, I think that like trust in the company is going to become really paramount, when a person can't go in and review, all of the training data that was used for an AI system that is recommending something to them that's not like that's not humanly possible. Versus in the past, maybe they might have been able to take a look, maybe we could have exposed the specific features, or the specific chain of events that happens when our technology is being developed. Now it's sort of like the AI is doing something we don't quite know, and we hope that it's optimizing on the right features, on the right labels, the right signals. But being able to trust in the company to have that accountability and to say, this is the information we have about how this system works. This is, the training data. And do you trust that company to have your best interests in mind as much as they can in this, kind of capitalistic incentive structure? And are they being accountable, when they do get if there's research that comes out that says, hey, this and this is happening, do they say, hey, we didn't realize that, we made a mistake, this is what we're doing to try to fix it? Like building that trust with the public, I think, is going to become more and more important as we move towards these sort of AI ecosystems. So yeah, if you think about, there's something called Goodhart's law that I wanted to mention, which is an adage that says that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And so that's what I mean when I say that, product managers are using measures and then maybe turning them into targets, which is natural. You want to have metrics, you want to understand how your system is performing, how people are using it. But it doesn't, when you are sort of having like a feedback loop on that metric, it can maybe go in a direction that is an unintentional direction, and maybe starts to diverge from the aspirational values of your users. So that's where I think that like the only answer I can really come up with is transparency and accountability. Yeah.
Any other panelists want to chime in on this?
Actually, I have a comment or a question for Aubrey, given her experience in the industry. As a researcher, we always claim and we always want this platform to be accountable and transparent. But how is this perceived on the other side? Do they really want to be transparent and accountable, or can they do something more?
Yeah, great question. I think that I don't think that it's perceived as, well, I don't know. I haven't worked at all of the companies, right? And so the spheres that I've usually been working in, like my job has usually been to champion responsible AI, or to champion, when I was working on product policy at TikTok, the kind of user experience, and especially with like young users, like thinking about the most vulnerable population that we serve, and how can I be the voice in the room for them. But I would say that we are usually in the minority as far as like being the one who is just thinking of that, being aware of it. So I don't think that it is so much of, I don't know about at the higher levels, but at the levels that I've been at, I don't think that it's like an intentional like resistance to that accountability and transparency, as much as it is just sort of this cultural these cultural blinders a little bit, maybe in computer science and in tech, that say that we are just creating this technology. And I think there's a lack of education, maybe in computer science degrees, about like the ethics of tech, and the fact that like we can't just say this is technology that lives behind a screen that you only use for work, and that you can just, I hate dealing with people and thinking about social constructs, therefore I went into technology. Like that doesn't work anymore. We know that technology is really, really integrated into our social spheres. And so I think there's a responsibility for those people who want to go into technology now to understand the impacts. And I just think that it isn't usually at the top of people's minds. They're asking, what am I supposed to be optimizing for? What are the metrics we want? Is it engagement? Is it time on the platform? Is it this? Okay, how do we do that? And they just do their job, and they're not necessarily taking that step back. And I think usually what I'm trying to do is be the person in the room who says, okay, let's take a step back. How could this affect things at a bigger scale? Like how could, as a linguist, I'm usually thinking about language. So for example, before I started working there, TikTok had blocked the word suicide, and that created unalive, right? And so linguists have looked at that and found that people of that generation feel a bit more stigma around the word suicide because it was blocked. And so if the spaces that you're in aren't allowing you to talk about a certain subject, or that you need to use the grape emoji or whatever it is, what effect does that have on like our perception of that topic and the kind of meta like linguistic effect? So I think it's just been a challenge to sort of create the space to have those conversations and encourage people to take a step back, more so than like intentional resistance. But like I said, I'm not in the on the boardrooms. I don't know what's going on at those higher levels. I don't know what they're talking about.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that and taking a step back and invite some discussion
Try.
that initiate
Yeah.
those. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. We've had several questions, and I think I tried to kind of mush them into one for the sake of time around a theme of adolescence. And so I think I've combined a couple of questions to ask for all of the panelists. What guidance can you share on supporting adolescents in developing healthy digital habits, balancing the benefits of online social connections with the risks of excessive screen time, potential future addiction, and the concerns of parents and educators?
Well, I think one thing we all agree on, so like, Ian, I think so I work with John Haidt and the Anxious Generation team, and so Ian referred to the moral panic and the idea that, there's some people who disagree with that. But I actually think the thing everyone agrees on is the giving agency to the users, right? Like I think regardless, like it's kind of whether you call it addiction or you call it a bad habit, there are a lot of kids who have less self-control who are using these products more than they want to due to the design of these systems. And so just fixing the design of these systems in those cases so that there's a lot of laws that sort of focus on the design of these systems, like optimizing for explicit preference, giving people more control, giving people more default privacy. Like if you want to, change the settings so you have infinite scroll and autoplay, fine, change it. But like the default should be something that sort of increases control versus something that helps them lose control. So that's like one. And then I also think like, just even there's ways that platforms just try to like get you to sign up for them when like a lot of people just want to talk to their friends and like watch what their favorite creators say. And so I actually think like some of the laws around account creation are perfectly reasonable. Just encouraging more logged out use, right? Like Reddit leads into logged out use over the last couple of years. We've done some studies at the Neely Center showing how people are learning a lot more as a percentage on Reddit because they're using it like search. They're using it to like learn a thing and then move on. And so like all these platforms that are trying to get you to create an account, like, it's kind of inappropriate for a 15-year-old to be creating accounts on these platforms and signing away their data when you don't let them set up a credit card and they don't really understand like the long-term consequences of these actions. And so why can't we just give them more access to content by not requiring every platform to sort of incentivize that logged out access so that we're not trying to lock them in.
Yeah, I would say that that's a really important step, Ravi. I completely agree because also there's, I think, a lot of concerns about some of the way, like there are certain laws, in particular, like the one that just went into effect in the UK that basically require everyone to like upload a photo ID in order to get an account, and then that basically allows, that's giving away a ton of privacy, and also like allowing for all sorts of like surveillance related to people's data and all these things to occur. So that's like a big concern about like how the legislation is going to be enforced and affect people. But back to the like topic of adolescence, like I think one thing that I would also add to what Ravi said is like we do know that in particular like adolescents are more sensitive to like the social rewards, the incentives baked into the platforms. And in turn, from like my perspective as someone who studies habits, basically like one of my papers showed basically like if you incentivize like engagement content, you're also incentivizing things like misinformation, moral outrage. Like you're also incentivizing now, I think, people are using like AI image generators and AI video generators to basically like create videos that are going to get engagement by like pissing people off, right? It's just like people are like the term rage bait, I feel like doesn't even like suffice to describe what we're seeing right now. So I think like, but these creators who are doing that are just following the incentives that the platforms have set out, right? They're like, you can literally get paid money if you generate enough clicks and things like this on your videos, right? And I think like this is an example of a really like bad and negative social media habit, and these things are also exposing like adolescents and people to the things that you're concerned about, Ravi, like these unwanted like violent images, nudity, like all these kind of things like go part and parcel with that. So I think as Ravi was saying, like we need to think very carefully about like what the incentive structure of these apps is incentivizing in terms of both the content that is being shared and also the content that people are like, oh, this is what I should reshare to get more clicks and more views for myself, right? And adolescents, because adolescents are way more sensitive to those things. So it's particularly important to think about with respect to them.
Maybe like a sort of follow-up question for the panel. So thinking about adolescence, I'm reminded of and specifically, Ian, when you were talking about like that, doing a digital detox maybe doesn't work because you might still have those triggers and want to come back, and thinking about how culturally important these areas are and this information is um, for people, for making connections at school. If you haven't seen the latest video or whatever it is, I'm kind of curious if anybody has any comments about like a harm reduction versus maybe like an abstinence, like coming from addiction sciences approach to like that's a little more realistic when it comes to using digital technologies. Let's just leave it broad.
Yeah, I think like in terms of harm reduction for absence, I get at something that I forgot to say earlier that I wanted to say is that I actually think like complete bans of like the use of smartphones and things like that, I think like that is an example of legislation that to me feels like completely throwing the baby out with the bathwater because I think we need to like it's not the only thing we need to do, right? I talked about all the incentive structures and problems, but like information literacy and all of these kind of things and media literacy within the context of these apps is something that's really important for like adolescents and like young people to learn because if you like completely ban them from using the apps, you're basically going to have a bunch of people coming online, coming into these apps with no prior experience and no way to understand what they're seeing, no way to contextualize the content, and no way to like basically understand like, hey, this algorithm is pushing me this content for this reason. And I think that's really important experience that you don't want to deny people. That's why I'm like not someone who's in favor of complete bans, but I think like education that integrates like phone use and social media app use and especially around like media literacy is super important. So I think like there needs to be a way to, you know, get the positive things that the bands have created, like Ravi was talking about, like, people, socializing in person in the hallways. Like this stuff is important, but I also don't think we should throw out like teaching people how to use their smartphone devices and digital media safely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, just it reminded me of like in college they had a lot of programs to teach people about alcohol use and like just things that like maybe people would assume everybody knew, like, wine is this percentage and what does a percentage mean? And that, these are the consequences. You can, actually go to the hospital and die and like that versus, just saying, don't drink, you're not 21. So it just reminds me of that a little bit, which I
Well,
think is interesting.
I'll just throw in an alternative perspective. I actually don't think of it as a ban. I think of it as a delay, right? And so it's like it's not about you never learn. It's just like what age is it appropriate to learn? And so like the average age of pornography exposure in the US is like age 12. And a lot of these kids are not looking for it. It's getting pushed to them, right? And so, if you could just delay it to 14 or 15, I think the kids would just be a lot more ready for some of the things they're going to see and the experiences. And the other thing I'd note is like a lot of kids aren't trying, they don't want to be on these services because they want to be on these services. And I'll put a study in the chat about that. Um, they want to be on these services because all their friends are on these services, right? So it's not like drinking or things that are like individual problems. It's a collective action problem. Kids don't worry about not using their phones in schools because their friends are also not using their phones in schools. And if some kids are using their phone in schools and other kids are not, then it's not an individual thing because like, oh, people are talking about me. I have no idea what they're saying, right? So it's not like it's different in that it's a social problem. And every parent who's like tried to stop their kids from using social media, like it's really hard to be the one parent saying like you can't use it when all your friends are using it. And that's why, you know, parents are getting together to all together do it. But like these collective action problems, that's the purpose of the ban, because it's not necessarily what kids want. It's not really a choice in a world where all your friends are using a thing. You actually don't really have much choice.
Thank you. Okay, we do have a bunch of questions we didn't get to, but in the interest of time, I think I'm going to ask one just kind of final, all-encompassing question for all the panelists that I think you can all answer, and it's that what advice would you give to this next generation of scientists and practitioners that are interested in digital media, wellness, addiction, innovation, all these things that we've talked about today?
Well, I can start saying that I think when it comes to technology and things like social media and generative AI or AI companionship, I think the most important thing will be to be exposed to these problems. So I don't know if you study a community like TikTok or problems that you may want to investigate on these platforms, the first thing to do will be to be exposed and to observe what exactly these communities are doing. I think Aubrey gave us a great example of how some communities may change their language in response to moderation action from social media platforms, for instance. This is an example of how you need to be there, how you need to be in the field to understand and to observe how things change within this platform. So I think my advice is to be there and to be embedded in this world and experiment and observe with your eyes what's going on.
Yeah, my advice would be similar, which is that everything that is happening within a historical context. I think it's really important to understand the culture that you're studying. Like it's not going to be the same in the United States as it is in Italy, right? And like I think, you know, understanding the forces that are at play and how the incentive structures, like we've all been talking about, play into what you end up seeing in front of you. I think just zooming out is like my advice, and really making sure that you understand how, like, the politics of, and you know, the where is the money coming from, you know, what are people incentivized to do or optimize. Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked Luca's point. I guess two things I'll add to that, and I think Aubrey just touched on that, is like not everything can be observed, right? So you need to bring people in, and understanding like the context around how they're looking at these things is really important, and it also helps you look at some of the causal factors behind this, right? So you know, a lot of these measures that we're taking online are just associative, so we need to go beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just repeat kind of where I ended, which is, you know, like I'm more in the applied space, and I think we need to, you know, I was really heartened the fact that people are applying these same models to addiction, to gambling, and to chatbots, because the general pattern is one that we're going to see over and over again, which is companies using technology to try to get you to use their product more, and it has kind of repeated, you know, issues that you know, the ways you get people's attention, you know, technology changes, but human beings don't, right? So the ways you get people's attention are going to be, they're going to rhyme with each other. And I think the more we can study those and think about, you know, how are people trying to get you to use these products more, and what are the externalities of that, which is not that different than other industries, right? Like, you know, people sell food and they want to sell it cheaper to get you to buy it, and we have safety standards for those, right? So you know, I think just really realizing like this is like a very normal thing for across technologies, and trying to question constantly, like, where are companies trying to get us to use these products more, and what do we have to do to sort of mitigate that while still allowing them to make money? I think is an important thing for us to continue to question.
Great. Well, we're just at 11:30, so I just wanted to say a very quick thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your insights, and to everyone in the audience for your thoughtful questions. I think today's conversation really reinforces like the power of bridging digital technology and addiction science and wellness science, and highlighted how essential it is really to kind of ground innovation in ethical decision making, responsibility, human-centered values. If you'd like to learn more, we encourage you to connect with IAS and the Neely Center. I did put a quick feedback survey in the chat to help us just kind of improve any of our future programs. So we'd be grateful if you could take just a moment to complete it. But on behalf of IAS, USC Marshall, the Neely Center, and our organizing team, thank you guys all again for joining us. We hope today's discussion sparks some future collaborations and actions. So have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend, everybody. Take care.
Thanks all.
Thank you.